Hello and welcome to the European Report. Here we are once again in the heart of the European Union, which is the European Parliament. And in today's programme, we're doing a special covering the shocking terrorist attack that occurred on this city that resulted in the death of over 34 people and over 300 people injured. So we're going to bring context to that shocking event that occurred in this city. And in today's programme, I'm joined by Timothy Kirkhope, Conservative MEP for Yorkshire and the Humber, and also the Conservative spokesman for Justice and Home Affairs in the European Parliament, the founder and director of the European Coalition for Israel, Tomas Sandell, and Rocky Gathright from Four Corners Global Ministry. So, gentlemen, welcome to the programme. And I'll start off with you, Tomas. Can you give us a bit of an update on some of the activities on behalf of the European Coalition for Israel that you've done recently?
Thank you, Simon. Good to be back in the studio, although we are now in -1 level, but nevertheless in a very interesting program. First to say that I was in Washington, D.C. when terror struck here in Brussels, and I was woken up not having any idea what was going on that morning. And this is the first time I'm, returned to Brussels after the attack, and you can see that it's a different Brussels. We are looking as European Coalition for Israel how we can be proactive, not only react but to take the lead. And I also believe that the European Parliament has a unique opportunity to take the lead in not only fighting what is bad, but promoting what is good. We will, in the next days, send a letter to the President of the European Parliament, Martin Schulz, calling upon the Parliament to take the lead in affirming good relations with Europe and Israel, in renewing the partnership with Europe and Israel, and also, very important, fighting BDS as a movement which is basically fueling the type of hatred that we've seen the results of now also in Europe, what hatred means when it comes to its most violent forms. So we see this as a window of opportunity for the European Parliament to really say what side are we standing on, and to take a firm stand on the side of Israel against terrorism in any shape or form, but also in saying we want more cooperation with Israel, and this is the time to take that lead.
Excellent. We have to discuss, maybe do that for the next programme. I think that'll be good to discuss the BDS. And Timothy, it's great to have you on the programme, especially considering your experience of working in Justice and Home Affairs. You are the Conservative spokesman for Justice and Home Affairs here in the European Parliament. But can you give your perspective to the shocking events that occurred on Tuesday, the 22nd of March, in which we saw the airport in Brussels attacked by 2 suicide bombers, as well as the metro only 500 yards away from the European Parliament here?
Yeah, well, I mean, terrorism, I'm afraid, is all too sadly a fact of life nowadays. It's a fact of life and a fact of death, and we really have to be united in our reaction to it. I think that undoubtedly the attacks that took place in Brussels, here in Brussels, were obviously from one particular element of society. But I think that reaction to that has to be complete and determined, not only here in Brussels, but I think also across the whole of Europe, and also with our friends in other democracies in the world. And you just mentioned Israel a moment ago. I mean, we all have to stand up against terrorist acts. In fact, looking at it from a politician's point of view, one of the greatest responsibilities that I have, all of us who are elected to office have, is to protect people, to protect the people I represent, of course, primarily, but also to be more generally interested in protecting people. And I think that the Parliament here, this European Parliament, has got to make sure that any of the legislation that it works on now has to take into account the need for some stability, but also the need to stand up strongly and determinedly against those that want to bring down the sort of freedoms and democracy that we believe in.
Absolutely. Timothy, I have to ask you, was this an attack on Belgium, or was this also an attack on the EU and NATO? Because Brussels is such an international city. What was the main intention behind these attacks?
I think possibly it was primarily an attack on Belgium. It was an attack on Brussels. I think that the nature of those attacks and so on, of course, they had an impact, particularly where the attacks were located, because Brussels is well known as the city where Europe is based, as it were. There must have been in their minds a clear understanding that this would disrupt the way in which the institutions of Europe were working. And indeed, some of the people who were killed were people who worked for the European institutions. But I think apart from that, there were other threats that were identified against Belgian politicians specifically. So I think that, and as the people concerned had at that time come from within Belgium, within Brussels, they had been there for some time. Indeed, they had gone out and been involved in some cases with the Paris attacks earlier. But nevertheless, these were Belgians or people in Belgium. And I think, therefore, it would not be right to suggest that this was primarily an attack on the European institutions.
And Ricky, I mean, you've got quite a hot, I don't know how to describe it really. You were there at the scene when the 2 suicide bombs went off the airport. Can you describe what you saw and what was happening around you?
So I had arrived at the airport that morning. It was just a normal airport run, drop off a friend, drive off. So I managed to get him out of the car, suitcases, get him into the building. As I'm driving away, the first bomb explosion takes place behind me. And then the people began to pour out of the building. And we normally wait for the pedestrians to cross. And now I'm sitting right at the main crosswalk and the main front door. And the people are just in fear, getting as far away from the building as possible. And I'm connecting with their emotions and their fear. But the second explosion then takes place about 10 seconds later. And all of the windows just come exploding away from the building. So it was almost like you were in a film. It was just as dramatic as you would feel. You never expect yourself to be in that situation, and here you are faced with it and being that close. Of course, we had no idea what was coming next. I decided to park my car and go and find my friend. So I thought it was important. I didn't know what I was going to be facing, but I thought, he could be in some other level of danger if I don't get him out of the building. But after I parked my car, the injured people began to come out of the building at that time. So people with blood on their clothes, and I first helped one lady who was a teacher and had students inside the building. The next man had a big gash on his head, and his blood was pouring down his face. So just one after the other just began to assist them in the process of getting them to a place of safety, or getting them to where they could be calm, and or in a safe location where somebody else could take care of them. I made it all the way to the other side of the building so that I could find my friend. The police had pushed a crowd behind the building, so I searched that crowd first and found my friend. We found ourselves right where they were setting up a triage unit, so we were able to just begin to help different people. The people were still shaking. Even 20 minutes, 30 minutes after the explosions, they were still shaking with fear. And just in the process of talking to them, they would be able to take a deep breath. They would be able to calm down. They'd put a human face to bring a little bit of peace to their life. So I felt like I was there for a reason. I felt like I was there for a purpose, and I felt this complete sense of calm and peace over me. I don't know why I felt that. I just felt that there was some kind of divine intervention for my own protection, and then it empowered me to help some others that actually had touched the level of fear that the explosions try to create.
And Rocky, can you describe a little bit more about your friend that you're dropping off at the airport and how close he came to death?
Yes,
in this terrorist attack?
He was supposed to report to the road number 11, and the bomb took place between a pharmacy and row number 11. So had he gone directly to the airport counter, he would have been in immediate danger of the first explosion. And of course, we had just arrived. He had just walked in the building. So it was very likely he could have gone straight there. He chose to actually go backwards away from that bombing location and went to go weigh his luggage again. And so in that process, it put him behind a concrete pillar, and he literally was out of the danger zone within a matter of seconds. And then after the second explosion went off, he said the ceiling tiles just began to fall out of the ceiling. So the feeling is the whole building might be coming down. There was no way of telling, so everybody just began to immediately run out of the building. So he was completely safe, and he's been processing the whole experience, over the last few days, and it's something that people have to work through, and you need time to kind of sort out your feelings and what just happened to you, and why, some of the safety issues of where you are.
Yeah. And finally on this one, how did it make you feel then when you actually caught up in the midst of this terrorist attack, looking back on reflection? Was it anger? Obviously you had concern for those who were caught up in the terrorist attack, see if you could help them, also with your friend as well. But what was your overriding emotion and feeling?
Well, the city is grieving. We've heard the medical reports. Some people have lost limbs. People have died. There's some serious injuries, and the city, I think, as a whole, are grieving. And many of the people have known somebody that was in the buildings or at the metro station. And I think the thing is that you feel like these were innocent people. These were not people going off to a war. These were people just going about their daily business. And there was no really. It's a senseless type of attack. It's a senseless thing where you're killing somebody who's not against you, and perhaps you're killing people that might even be for your cause. But so it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think the city is grieving. There's a lot of anger against that type of action, and it just stirs up a lot of emotions, and we have to kind of sort through what we're feeling, get to a place where it can make sense, or that we recognize that we have to take a different type of strategy.
Thank you so much for sharing, Rocky. And Tomas, both of us have arrived within the last couple of days into this city, and the level of security really is unprecedented, with so many garrisons of Belgian paratroopers and troops, machine guns around as well. And it's certainly not business as usual in this city, and still very tense. But this comes only a few months after the horrendous attack we saw in Paris. Do you think we're now entering into a new era of terrorism on the continent of Europe?
Well, it really depends on what perspective we have. We were just speaking with Mr. Kirkhope before the recording and recalling some of the events in London during the days of Thatcher and the IRA, and this is of course something we forget or tend to forget, and being a Finn, that was not really anything that was affecting me. But as Rocky is also indicating, this international terrorism, it doesn't follow any logic. It's not a territorial dispute like the case may have been in Britain at the time, and it's really so vicious and in a way that we cannot understand it in a conventional way. And of course, I do think it's true to say that we've entered a new phase when Europe is not really what it used to be after Paris, after Brussels, and we all have to take our responsibilities, and of course decisions made in this chamber are very important. What our ministers decide in terms of creating better coordination to do actually what government first and foremost is have the obligation to do, and that is to protect its citizens.
Yeah. And Timothy, drawing from your vast knowledge and experience of dealing with crime and terrorism, what are the lessons that we can learn from this latest ISIS terrorist attack that's hit this city?
Well, I think we first of all have to, say learn lessons is a very good point, because really we have been taught quite a lot of lessons over many years, not just with these most recent attacks. Whether we have actually learnt from those lessons, I'm not absolutely certain. there is, of course, naturally a wish that you're not going to get your life disrupted in this way. And these indiscriminate attacks, as has been said by my colleagues here, they are totally indiscriminate in that in public transport or in public places like an airport, you don't go in there and determine first what sort of people it is that you're going to kill. Those people could be indeed those who believe like you do about a particular political or international cause. They may be people of the same religion as you. They may be people who have a lot of things in common and that you would never dream of wanting to harm if you had make that choice in a cold, cool way. But the truth is, of course, that people are now under threat. And so if we're going to learn anything more from Paris now, or from London from a few years ago, from Paris, and now from Brussels, then I think we have to look carefully at this important question of the balance between the rights we all want to enjoy in a democracy, freedom of expression, but freedom of behavior, and the need for security. I have to say, as a former minister for security issues, I have always been perhaps slightly more inclined to say that when you have pressures of this kind going on, you need to change that balance a little bit. It's not ideal because, you want to protect those freedoms, but your greatest requirement is to protect people and the way of life that they enjoy or want to enjoy as far as you can. And that means, I'm afraid, that security becomes more important, and that may in itself have a certain limitation on our total enjoyment, but it will at least give us greater protection. That's where the decisions have to be taken by the legislators, be taken here in Brussels, taken in the capital cities of Europe and elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tomas, sadly, according to the Times of Israel, that the Israeli security forces gave a warning to the airport authorities here in Brussels, essentially saying that the airport is pretty much unprotected and needs to ramp up its security. What do you think the lessons are that Brussels and the European Union can deal with the way that Israel deals with and tackles terrorism?
I think there are two dimensions which are relevant for me. One is the human dimension. It's interesting, there was recently a new sort of happiness index trying to determine how happy different peoples are. And the Israelis were very high up, I think like among the five most happy people groups in the world. And then you have to ask the question, this is people that are living under constant terrorist threat, has done so since day number one of the creation of the Jewish state. So I think psychologically there's something we have to learn from the Jewish psyche of having to accept the fact that we live in a dangerous world, death can come anytime, but to appreciate life, to celebrate life, and just to keep that sound state of mind. Secondly, of course, when it comes to intelligence gathering, it comes to security cooperations, there's no country which is better in this than Israel. And we saw this after Paris, the ones that came, in Brussels, we may have our, ideas of Israel, and some are very negative, but when terror strikes, people know what number to call.
Very true.
And they have been very generous, I think, in coming to our rescue after Paris, preventing new terror attacks in Düsseldorf and other places. And as you mentioned, also been ongoing advising on how we could improve our security here. And obviously, if there's any airport in the world that airport authorities will have to look to now, is Ben Gurion in Tel Aviv.
Absolutely. And, Rocky, we're sadly down to the last 5 minutes or so of the programme, maybe a little bit more. But we see that, you're a missionary here. You do a lot of work with various Christian ministries and churches here you're from Texas, but you're over here in Brussels. And, it was only in 2014 we saw the last terrorist attack on the Jewish Museum that killed 4 Jewish people in May of 2014. Do you think there is a correlation between anti-Semitic terror attack and what we saw only a couple of weeks ago here in Brussels?
Yeah, I think the the Islamic State is actually against the Western world. They're against America. They're against Israel. They're against Europe, and Europe needs to be aware of that. I think Israel faces a lot of attacks, like Tomas said. Here we are. We're getting a firsthand taste of that reality, and we've complained how Israel is handling their terrorism. But now that it comes to our doorstep, I think we'll hopefully wake up a little bit more, and we'll at least appreciate what they've been going through on a constant basis. I think though that Christians have to wake up. I think Christians have to continue to be the glue of society. They create honesty, they create integrity inside of the society, and I think this is what dismantles a lot of anger issues, a lot of hatred, a lot of racism, is when you have people that are strong enough and mature enough to overlook problems or to deal with the problems, not to ignore the problems, but to diffuse the problems face to face and neighbor to neighbor.
Yeah. And Timothy, I have to really ask you, because obviously in our own country, back in Britain, there's a very heated debate about our relationship with the European Union, with a big referendum coming up on Thursday, the 23rd of June, which the British people decide whether we remain in the European Union or not. Do you think that the latest terrorist attack here in Brussels will play on the minds of British voters looking at this security situation in Europe?
Well, obviously one of the considerations about our future relationship with Europe has to be whether or not the security side of things is better if we are part of Europe or better if we're not. I know there are differences of opinion in my own party as well, but I happen to believe that security is better when you are able to work with others and exchange information and intelligence and so on. By the way, I didn't mention in my remarks about intelligence exchanges and the help that we in Britain too have had working with the Israeli agencies and to deal with these particularly nasty movements and terrorists. But I do think that it will be an issue. I think people in Britain are concerned for their future security, and they will want to be, I think, assured more, perhaps, than they have been so far, that in fact by remaining within the European Union we are genuinely going to be safer. As I said, I happen to believe we would be, but I can perfectly respect the views of others who have real ongoing concerns about this.
And Tomas, really our heart must go out to the Jewish community here in Belgium, particularly because they feel very scared, they feel very isolated, and they feel that they could be the next target. And we've seen that there has been increased security measures to protect Jewish places of worship and also Jewish schools and synagogues and what have you. What can the European Parliament and the European Union do, and also the government of Belgium do, to protect this vulnerable, important Jewish community in Belgium?
Obviously, it's up to the member states to take appropriate action. So all religious communities, but the Jewish communities in particular, would feel safe and protected. And but when it comes to the European Parliament, I think symbolic actions can sometimes be just as important as concrete legislations. And that's why we want, with this letter, with this open letter to the President of the European Parliament, to say this is a time to affirm the values that we share with Israel, the values that we call Judeo-Christian values, some would call them universal values. And we know that it's really these values that are under threat. It's not a particular narrow-minded ideological agenda, but it's really being against our way of life. And we should really, this is the time to stand up together with our Israeli friends and say, well, this is the values that we believe in, and we have a common heritage, but we also have a common future.
Absolutely. Rocky, I'm going to give you the kind of final word on this program. As someone who has virtually survived a terrorist attack and had your friend in the midst of this, what kind of message do you have for our viewers who are Christians, who are concerned about the security situation here in Europe and maybe too afraid to actually come to Europe now because of what's happened?
Well, I don't think that we should be afraid. I think the world is a tough place to live in, no matter where you live. And but I think as a whole we have to learn to deal with our problems and not run away from our problems. And I think Christians can be a strong element here. And I think they need to be a strong element here. I don't feel like we should run away because you're giving more room for the other factions to move in when you vacate the possibility of bringing those solutions. And I think Christians have a voice into this. They have eternal security. That eternal security will drive you forward even in the face of fear. Perfect love casts out all fear. That's the one that's driving us to know how to love beyond ourselves, away from our selfishness. That's where we serve other people.
I just want to thank you all for watching today's European report from the European Parliament as we discuss the recent terrorist attack that hit Brussels only a few weeks ago, which resulted in the death of over 36 people as well as injuring over 300. So it's important that we keep the families of those victims of this terrorist attack in our prayers, as well as those that are injured, but also that we need to make a stand against this ideology that would consume and destroy Europe and our values of democracy, freedom, and also religious freedom. And that's why it's important that we don't keep quiet at this time, but that we speak out in the name of truth and in the name of justice and the name of freedom. So I want to thank you for watching today's European report.